Phelps. It is my pleasure to be here this evening to have a conversation. Well, maybe not a conversation, but an opportunity to share with young people who are part of this consortium with the Heights. I am I am Michael Ryan, and I am one of the six judges who serve at the Juvenile Court. That's for the Calgary County Court of Common Pleas Juvenile Division. And when a lot of people hear about me being a judge, especially when they see me, they think, okay, this guy's young, and he's African American. He probably had an easy path to the bench. In fact, I always recall a conversation that my wife, not my wife and I, but my wife's friends and I had when I was actually in law school. And these individuals I didn't grow up with, they had no idea, about my past other than the fact that I was dating one of their friends. And so we were playing spades one day, and one of them said, "Yeah, um, Mike went to this. Mike, we went to the school of hard knocks, and Mike just went to school." And they obviously didn't understand where my life had derived from for me to be where I was on that particular time. And I was in law school, and they were working. And so from that, I kind of figured there's a lot of people who have this misconception about who I am and how I arrived where I am. And unfortunately, people just think that, I had an easy path to the bench, either because of my family having wealth or just having connections. And that was the reason why I was elected. But that's far from the truth. In fact, the path was filled with a lot of potholes and a lot of ditches and talk about broken glass. It was just not a path that I would say most judges take to ascend to the bench. Um, Most people would say that you grew up with a silver spoon in my mouth, but in fact, the spoon was more like plastic or wooden. And I say that because I started with the odds stacked against me. My mom was only 14 years old when she discovered she was pregnant with me. My biological father, we didn't actually meet each other until I was 25 years old. And that was partly due to the fact that he was incarcerated in federal prison shortly after I was born. And there was another reason why, and that was due to the man that I grew up believing was my father. He actually stepped in and stepped up. The prototypical stepfather. He allowed me to become immersed in his family, so much so that to this day, his nieces and nephews, those are my cousins, his brothers and sisters, my aunts and my uncles, his mother and father. I've always known them and always believed them to be, my grandparents. Um, Sometimes I joke that they treated me better than they treated my sister, and she was related by blood. But that's just an example of how much I became a part of the family. And like I said, I didn't know he wasn't my father until I was about maybe 11, 12 years old. And so he created that barrier between me and my real father, along with my real father's problems with um, abiding by the law. And so I grew up with my stepdad and my stepdad's family. And some would say, well, wow, your stepdad did a wonderful thing. He decided to raise another man's child, didn't have an obligation to do so. And you would think that that'd be somebody who should be, you know, um, celebrated in the community, somebody who should be emulated. But there was a lot of stuff about him that I didn't want to emulate or imitate, notwithstanding, what he did initially. And that was because I had so many horrific memories growing up about the abuse and violence that he perpetrated on me and my sister, but more importantly, the violence that he perpetrated on my mother. As I was telling you before, my mom was pretty young when she gave birth to me. Um, And, my dad was actually the first person to hold me, my stepdad. But that is completely opposite of who he was. He was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde at times. Um, and the Dr. Jekyll was the worst part because I had, like I said earlier, vivid memories of, you know, waking up to my mother screaming for help, or it'd be times when I was awake and I hear her screaming for help, and I run to the place where those cries were coming from, only to see the man who again I thought was my father picking up my mother and slamming her on the floor, or slamming her up against the wall, or throwing her on the bed. One time I actually saw him pick her up and slam her on the concrete outside. At times after he slammed her, he would then dive into her chest with his knee. He would start punching her, slapping her, strangling her. And sometimes he would even stomp her. And this was just, it was frightening for me to see this because I didn't know if he was going to, hurt my mom to the point that he killed her. And the fact that I just didn't want to see my mom getting beaten. Um, I was not the only one witnessing this. My sister was as well. So the two of us, would be crying and screaming and begging for him to stop, and he wouldn't. In fact, my mother would be crying and screaming and begging for him to stop, and I think that just fueled him because he hit her harder and longer. And these type of beatings occur not once or twice a year, but almost once or twice a month. And it would be like clockwork. They would, get into some verbal altercation, and then the next thing you know, here's the fight. And I won't even say a fight. Here's the brutality of my father, um, you know, um, ferociously beating my mother, and then I would be the one responsible for helping her heal. I had to get the face towel that was filled with ice so she could bring the swelling down to her eyes, her nose, or her lips. I was the one responsible for getting tissue so to dry up the blood or wipe up the blood that was coming from her nose and her mouth. I had to watch the woman who I thought was the most beautiful person in the world put makeup on to hide the marks that my stepdad had caused. Um, and I saw her put on turtlenecks during the summertime so she could be able to hide the um, the strangulation marks on her neck. It was, it was challenging. It was difficult for us to be able to live and watching that and being able to reconcile how, wait a minute, your father is supposed to love your mother, but at the same time he is beating her mercilessly. That was a challenge for me. And instead of developing that good relationship with my dad, I actually started to despise him because of it. And I just couldn't um, reconcile the two things. So it was a challenge growing up, having to witness that, um, month after month, especially for me being as young as I was, 4 till I was 11 years old. And I'll tell you in a moment why I stopped at 11. But in addition to my stepdad being abusive towards my mother, he abused his own body by being addicted to alcohol and more particularly being addicted to heroin. And my mother was also addicted to heroin, which made life like complete chaos for us because when they weren't fighting, they were both high. And so when they're fighting, they're both high. Um, that left my sister and I pretty much trying to fend for ourselves. Um, like I told people, countless times, as it was, if it wasn't for the free lunch and breakfast programs the schools provide, or the free lunch and uh, breakfast programs that the rec centers provided during the summer, or the churches provided when the rec centers were closed during the summer, or during the weekend, or during the holiday, then there would have been many nights that my sister and I would not have eaten. And that's because, my parents, because of their drug addiction, they were taking the food stamps they were supposed to use to care for us, and instead using that to go and buy more drugs. They traded the food stamps for money to purchase drugs, which meant that there were times during the end of the month that we didn't have anything to eat. And so I tell, a particular story that kind of illuminates what we have been going through. It was one summer, and I woke up and pretty hungry. Went to the refrigerator, didn't see anything. There's nothing in cabinets that I could reach, so I went back to bed. Woke back up maybe a half an hour later, and again hungry, and was been recalled there was a box of crackers that was in one of the cabinets. So pushed the chair up to the counter, got on the chair, opened the cabinet door up, and at the top there was a box of crackers. I reached up, grabbed them, got off the chair, and then I looked inside of the box. There was one wrapper left. Pulled the wrapper out, and as I opened it, there were roaches inside. And so that was one day, obviously, that I went hungry because I wasn't going to compete with the roaches. I let them have at it. And that just, gives a description of, the days that what we were dealing with on an almost daily basis. My mom and my dad, instead of them, their behavior getting better, just got progressively worse, especially after my stepdad wound up going to prison. I was actually in court when he was sentenced to 4 to 25 years in prison. And my mom, instead of her drug use getting better, recognizing, okay, my stepdad is gone, it's just the three of us, it got worse to the point where my stepdad's mom, who, like I stated earlier, I consider to be my grandmother, my grandma Lula came down to Longwood Projects, and she saw the squalor we were living in. She said, okay, that's enough. She said, I can't continue to see these kids being put through so much turmoil, so much um, neglect and abuse. And she took custody of us. She didn't go to Children and Family Services. She didn't contact the police department. In fact, she didn't go to probate court. She just says, Michael and my sister, you guys are coming to live with me. And I was actually ecstatic. I was so excited because I knew going to live with her, we were going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I knew going to live with my grandmother Lula that when we woke up in the middle of the night, she would be there. There were too many times when I woke up with my parents in the middle of the night or the next day, and nobody was home. And they wouldn't come home for hours, sometimes not to the next day. And even when they did come, they were so high, they had no awareness of what my needs, what my sister's needs were. And so that was frightening for us as children. But with grandma, that wasn't a problem. She gave us the love, the stability, the hope that we needed to be able not to just survive, but to thrive. Um, we knew living with her that we weren't gonna be moving from neighborhood to neighborhood or from school to school. With her, we were gonna have that stability, that focus that we needed to excel, and that's what my sister and I did while we were living with my grandmother. Um, and another reason why I was excited, not only because I was going to eat, was because I thought, okay, this is a chance for my mother to get her life in order. Unfortunately, my mother was not able to do so. And at the tender age of 28, my mother wound up dying from a disease she contracted from using drugs. And then for that year, my grandmother tried to be that rock for my sister and I, tried to provide that love and affection that we needed, trying to deal with the loss of our mom. And then she wound up dying almost a year to the date that my mother did. And at that point, my head is spinning. I'm like, what is going to happen next? Um, and my sister and I had to go live with one of my stepdad's sisters, my aunt. That situation wasn't too kosher for us, and so we had to go and move with another aunt, one of my stepdad's sisters, and we were there again, another place of stability, another place of hope and guidance and direction. But then she wound up moving back to Cleveland. At this point, we were in Cleveland Heights, and she was moving to a smaller home. Um, my sister and I, we were caught in between. Do we want to leave, or what are we going to do? And so we called my grandmother, who lived in New York, and she came back to take care of us. By that point, I was in my final year of high school, and my sister was starting her sophomore year. I'm the kind of kid, based on the trauma that I experienced, that I wasn't supposed to be where I am today. I definitely wasn't supposed to, graduate from high school. Most people thought, especially those who knew the circumstances that we had endured, would say, "No way does he graduate." And not only did I graduate from high school, but I graduated through the Gifted and Talented program at Heights High, Cleveland Heights High School. And I was successful enough to receive a scholarship leaving Heights. And I actually went on to attend Allegheny College. I was at Allegheny College for 4 years. I received my undergrad degree, and eventually decided to go to Cleveland Marshall College of Law, was accepted to Cleveland Marshall College of Law, came back home, and I graduated law school in 3 years. At each level, high school, college, and law school, I was awarded financial assistance because of the efforts that I put forth in the classroom. So at Allegheny, after my freshman year, they called me into the financial aid office, and they asked me, well, first they said, "We've been monitoring your grades, and we wanted to know if you'd be interested in a new scholarship that was being offered." And I told them yes. It was the quickest yes in recorded history. And it was an opportunity for me to defray a lot of the costs to go to Allegheny. Allegheny College now, if you had to attend with tuition, fees, room and board, total probably would be about 50,000 a year. Um, and so when I was there, it was about 15,000 a year. And so I left Allegheny College only owing them $6,000 in loans, because they paid for $54,000 worth of my education, which would have been about, now, if you talk about 50,000, that's about 100,000. No, I'm sorry, $200,000 for 4 years at Allegheny. And imagine them paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $190,000 worth of my education. When you compare 2000, strike that. I mean, when you compare 1996 numbers to 2021. And so I then left Allegheny after receiving my degree, and went to Cleveland Marshall, and I received two scholarships during my third year of law school, again to help defray some costs for bar exam. I passed the bar to be a lawyer at the age of 25, my first time taking the test. And I've been a lawyer, licensed attorney since November of 1996. My first position or job as an attorney was working as an assistant prosecuting attorney for the city of Cleveland. I prosecuted cases as minor as um, a red light violation to as major as domestic violence. So I also heard cases like driving under the, not heard, but prosecuted matters for driving under the influence, for assault, for bribery, for criminal damaging, just all of the misdemeanor offenses that were alleged to have been committed in the city of Cleveland. After working there for a year and a half, I was able to work with Mayor White's office, and I was the director of the Office of Professional Standards, or administrator for the Office of Professional Standards. And in that position, I was responsible for managing the office that heard complaints against police. And in that role, I managed several civilian employees as well as three sergeants with the police department. The three sergeants were required to complete investigations based on complaints that were made by citizens regarding police misconduct. Uh, the um, the civilian employees were responsible for um, taking those complaints, and then one was responsible for auditing the investigation that they were completed. It's my responsibility to review the investigation, determine whether or not there was any misconduct, and if I did, I would draft my opinion regarding misconduct and what particular either state statutes that were violated or codes by the police that were violated. And then I gave that to the Civilian Police Review Board, and they're the ones that made the final determination as to whether or not an officer committed any infractions. And if they found or substantiated the complaint made by the citizen, then the case was forwarded to the chief of police. I then would go over to the chief of police's office and represent the Civilian Police Review Board. And the chief of police, after that presentation, found that the person or that officer did something improper and they recommend discipline, then that would be taken to the director of public safety. And then that individual had the ultimate decision on whether or not to discipline the officer, which could be up and including termination, up to and including termination. I only stayed on that. I stayed on that job for about a year, and then I went back to being a prosecutor. Then I actually left the government and began working as an associate attorney for Forrest Fields and Associates. I did that for about a year and a half, and in that job, I was able to gain some experience with respect to criminal defense work. I represent a number of people at the municipal court level, at the county level. Didn't represent anybody federally, at least not with respect to any criminal defense work. But because of Mr. Forbes's office, I did a lot of personal injury work. So representing people who have been involved in car accidents or who slipped and fell, if they were visiting particular places, could be nursing homes or governmental offices. We represented individuals there. I represented a child actually had gotten bitten at a daycare. So it was a variety of cases that I was able to get experience with on the civil side as well as criminally. I represented different organizations. I was the attorney for particular boards throughout the county, and I also had the opportunity to represent different corporations. And because of Mr. Forbes's connections, he brought in a lot of business for the law firm, and then that particular business was farmed out to the associates. So got a lot of experience doing something other than criminal work. And so what that did, that gave me a great resume when it came to becoming a magistrate. And it was my desire to become a judge after working as a prosecutor. Uh, because of a particular case that I had as a prosecutor, that is what led me to envision a time on the bench. A judge had given a particular sentence that I did not agree with. And so I said, if I were the judge, this is what I would do. And so that led me to say, well, what what steps do I need to take in order to be able to acquire that goal of becoming a judge? And so I knew that I had the criminal experience, but I needed the civil experience, and that's why I went and took the position as an associate attorney. And then when the position for magistrate opened, I said, well, this is a chance for me to actually become a judicial apprentice because I will be given the chance to sit under judges, learn from them, and it would help me with respect to me making decisions on cases. And so I applied for the position and was originally rejected for another individual. That individual decided that they did not want the position. And so I was second. And so I gladly accepted that role. And it was beneficial for me. Why? Because I came right in as a magistrate, and I was the youngest person they had ever appointed as a full-time magistrate. I was 30 years old, and it helped me develop a sense of temperament, being able to balance, making decisions on cases because I have been I've been a prosecutor, and I've been a defense attorney, and so I was able to say, okay, this is where I see the strengths on both sides, and this is how I'm going to decide. Also, because of the civil experience that I had with Mr. Forbes' office, that also helped me with respect to the civil cases that I heard as a magistrate. Most of you know Judge Judy, know Judge Joe Brown, um, uh, you know, uh, Judge Mathis. Well, small claims court, that's what Judge Mathis, Judge Judy, Judge Joe Brown does. They're responsible for hearing those type of cases. And that's what I did for 4.5 years as a magistrate. Um, Partly that was maybe every 3 months I was responsible for doing small claims. But I also was responsible for hearing matters involving license suspensions. I was also involved with hearing actually the personal dockets of the judges. They had that much confidence in me for me to actually sit um, in substitution for them if they had other responsibilities to take care of. And so I did that for a number of judges on a very consistent basis. And again, that was practice for me for when I would be given the opportunity to sit in that seat. So after 4.5 years, I decided to run for judge. Actually, let me take that back. After 3.5 years, I decided to run for judge. But after talking with a number of other political figures, um, no, let me go back. 3.5 years, yes, after being a magistrate, I ran for judge. I officially ran for judge, but I ran for judge for the county, Calgary County. At that time, there were no African American males at the county level in any way, shape, or form. Um, and so I was trying to draw on that, and I wasn't successful, but I was successful enough where it got a lot of individuals' attention. And because I didn't have a lot of support in my first race, I wound up getting a lot of support in my second race because of the effort that I put forth in the first one and introducing myself to the community. And when I ran the second time, I actually ran against four other candidates. It was five of us running for a seat that was being vacated by Judge Maple Jasper, who had to leave the seat because she had reached the age limit. And I actually won that race out of those five individuals, and I won it by about, I think, 7 or 8 thousand votes, which is pretty remarkable when you talk about five people being in a race for judge. And so that was in 2005, and I was sworn in as a municipal court judge in 2006. I held that position until 2012. In 2011, I was reelected to municipal court within 2012, came and a position opened in the juvenile court. Unfortunately, Judge Peter Secor had passed away, and so his seat became available. I had a what we call intra-party election. So I'm a Democrat, and other several other Democrats who wanted to be appointed on the ballot to run against the individual who had been appointed by the governor to fill Judge Secor's seat. And I was able to defeat some long-term established Democrats, individuals who have been um, officers in the party, individuals who are still pretty well known within the party and entrenched in the party. But I believe because of who I am, what I had experienced, what I had been exposed to, what I had overcome, would be beneficial for both families and children in the Collier County Court of Common Pleas Juvenile Division. And so I was appointed as a Democrat to run in that seat, and then I won my election by um, a 70 to 30% margin. So it was pretty significant. And I became at that point the youngest African American male to be elected to the juvenile court. In fact, I was the second African American male to be elected in the 118-year history of that court. And right now, I sit as the only African American male in the juvenile court at this time in the entire state of Ohio. So there are no other Black male juvenile court judges in the state. And it could be daunting because the focus is on you about decisions that you make, the things that you're doing in the community, and how you are upholding, a standard for everybody else to follow. Is one that I approach with dignity, respect, and vigor, and one that I hope I'm emulating, that someone wants to come behind me and do the same thing. Now, my job as a judge for the juvenile court is to preside over cases where juveniles, so anyone who's 17 years or younger, are accused of committing criminal offenses. We call those delinquencies in juvenile court. I'm also responsible for hearing cases where um, you know, children are removed from their parents. So I make the determination as to whether or not children should be returned back to their parents. I hear cases regarding child support, regarding establishment that individual is a parent. Um, we also hear what we call bypass cases or Jane Doe cases. So young ladies who are pregnant and either cannot get consent from their parents or choose not to try to get consent from their parents can come to the court, and we make a determination regarding their maturity, um, regarding their emotional stability, um, knowledge regarding the procedure, and making a determination as to whether or not they can we can grant them the ability to obtain an abortion without having consent from their parents. I also, with respect to delinquencies, sometimes have to make a decision as to whether or not a youth should be bound over to the adult court. So that means an individual is at least 14 years old and they are charged with a felony offense. I decide based on filing by the state of Ohio, although the court could raise the issue itself in determining whether or not a child should be bound over. If you're 14 years old and there's an allegation that you committed any felony level offense, that is a path towards being bound over as an adult. But you would have to go through what we call a discretionary procedure. So there's a probable cause hearing. The probable cause is established regarding your age, regarding the offense, and probable cause that you committed the offense. Then we move to an amenability hearing. At the amenability hearing, we determine if you're amenable to the care or rehabilitative services that are offered through the juvenile justice system. That means in your case is transferred if I find it not amenable and also find the safety of the community may require that you be subjected to adult sanctions. Another route to um, be tried as an adult is if you are 16 years old and you commit what we call category one offense or category two offenses. So a category one offense is if you um, are charged with murder, aggravated murder, attempted murder. Those are, and there's probable cause for that, even if it's based on the fact that you were complicit in an act, then there's an automatic bind over. You don't even go through the amenability hearing. If you are 16 years old, you commit what we call a category two offense. So that could be aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, aggravated arson, um, kidnapping, rape, and you are in possession of a firearm, then that means that it's mandatory that you be bound over to the adult court. Another way is if you commit any of those category two offenses and you've had a prior commitment to the Ohio Department of Youth Services for a category one or category two offense, then you are bound over to the adult court. If you are bound over to the adult court and then you are found guilty of an offense that you are bound over for, then you are deemed not to be a child any longer and you're deemed to be an adult. So, say for instance, someone is bound over at the age of 16 or let's say 15, and then they are found guilty of a criminal offense as an adult, but they later commit other offenses as a juvenile. The cases aren't heard in juvenile court any longer. They're heard in the adult court at that point. So, young people need to be mindful of that as well. Uh, I know I've been talking for some time. I'm not sure if I've gone past my allotted time, but I will say this in terms of just advice that I would give individuals who want to pursue this type of career is that you need to be reading a lot and love reading and writing with respect to being an attorney. Um, I, didn't start off doing that well with English. In fact, English was my worst subject out of all of the subjects that I enjoyed in high school, middle school, elementary school, and college. In fact, my favorite subject was history, and so history, political science, those type of classes really piqued my interest. But after having a conversation with my advisor and telling her that I wanted to be an attorney, she said, "Well, you need to make sure that you can write well because the professors, the law school professors, and the judges were complaining about the inability of the lawyers to write articulately such that they can understand the message or the argument that they were trying to relay to the court." And I was like, "Oh boy, English is not my cup of tea." But I actually made the sacrifice. When I was at Allegheny, I took a ton of English classes, knowing that, okay, it's not my best subject. I'm probably not going to get, the best grades, but it'll be something that will assist me in my future. And sure enough, I took those courses, and I wasn't getting the A's and the B's like I was getting in political science and some of the other courses that I had taken in Allegheny. Nevertheless, I stuck with it. I kept doing it. And when I looked up to declare a major, I had so many English classes that English just was the natural thing for me to do. So I continued along that path, and it didn't necessarily help me with my GPA at Allegheny, but when I discussed with the admissions committee on my application why my GPA wasn't at the level that they usually expect it to be, they understood. And they probably were able to tell by my writing that it was really beneficial for me to go through something very challenging, and it wound up being extremely beneficial for me in the end. And there's evidence of the fact that all of the difficulties that I went through and taking those courses were helpful because I've had judges when I was an attorney, um, respond um, pretty noticeably, and they will respond in favorably to me to say that your writing is excellent, um, and that would be persuasive for them in making the decision on my behalf or on the client's behalf that I had wrote the memorandum for, or a motion to dismiss, or a motion for summary judgment. Those are things that I wrote on behalf of some of the judges. In fact, I wrote opinions on behalf of the judges. They just signed them, but that was my writing. In fact, I had one of my supervisors asked when they were reviewing a motion for a jurist, who wrote this, and I told them I wrote it, and they were somewhat amazed by the fact that I had that ability. Also, I had former boss actually tout my writing skills in front of all of the other magistrates, which was pretty um, welcoming and surprising, but also, joyful for me because it showed that hard work does pay off. Because I went to college actually to become a teacher and not to become an attorney. And the reason why I wanted to be involved in education is because school had been a refuge for me. And so it was there that I was able to win, because I lost so much when I was at home, when I was in the community. But at school, I could win. I couldn't control my mom and my dad's drug use. I couldn't control my stepdad beating my mom. I couldn't control, having role models like, my fathers and uncles and cousins who were involved in the criminal justice system. But I could control my own behavior. I could control if I studied for an exam. I could control who I associated with. I could control whether or not I would actually be prepared for exams, be prepared for quizzes. And so I control whether or not I got an A or an F. And so those are the things that I was able to emphasize, those things that I controlled. The things that I didn't control, I just prayed about those things and I let God handle those. And you see where it led me today. That is, I would imagine, being a successful attorney who is, I hope, a good judge who makes the proper decisions on behalf of the individuals that come before the court. Uh, I don't know what more I could say other
Well,
than,
I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but please go ahead.
okay, I could say other than there's two things that you can take from my life, at least up to this point, is that one, if you've gone through some of the same kind of challenges and struggles and difficulties that I did, the obstacles that I face, or worse, then I hope that I provided a roadmap for you to say that, you know, don't let those things define your future. And for those individuals who have never encountered what I did or never will, then there's no excuse for you not to be successful. So, again, I thank Ms. Phelps. I thank the Heights Consortium for allowing me to speak into the lives of so many young people.
Thank you so much, Judge Ryan. Your story is such an inspiration. I'm sure any student listening will, from beginning to end of your sharing, will find something that they can relate to and something that will inspire them. So we certainly appreciate you just very candidly sharing your story. We can't say enough.
Oh, you're quite welcome. It was my pleasure to do it anytime and all the time.